property and control of the private landowner to control. So that there's just kind of comfort level with it. It replicates to some extent slavery in that regard. Although notice that often more than in slave times, where slavery was occasionally somewhat used for industrial purposes, but much more for agricultural purposes. In Georgia and other states, the convict lease system was primarily not agricultural. They actually primarily worked in what you think of as sort of mines, manufacturing, that dimension of very hard physical labor, outdoors often, but not really farming. So it was a step forward in terms of Southern economic development, as well as being connected culturally. What about the kind of public values, public affront, corruption issues that worked against the Philadelphia wheelbarrow law? In other words, the concern about not wanting to see offenders out in public, the desire to have them shut away behind walls. What might make the South more comfortable with this kind of public outdoor system? Again, I think race has a lot to do with this. How might race help explain the sort of differential response to the cultural appearance of convicts outside working as opposed to being, behind a wall?
They're probably less offended by seeing a black person struggling with this intense labor than they would be offended by seeing how horrendous it was for a white person to be doing it.
So they're not likely to be sympathetic. It's not likely to be a problem with people being too sympathetic with the person being worked, right? So that might have been a concern with the Philadelphia model, sort of unwanted sympathy or solidarity. That's not as likely to happen. Yeah.
Isn't it also the case that both white and black cultures were hoping that the time way was supposed to be that the black people were supposed to do the labor and the white people were supposed to reap the benefits of that labor? So this could just reestablish the normative values of the NFL period.
I think that's right. There's kind of a double function here, right? One is to provide a new legal account of the same social positioning, right? Slavery's been abolished. We can't work people for their whole lives just because they were born to a slave. That's pretty much what that means. But we still have white supremacy. We still want this system of unquestioned and unbridgeable gap with whites on top, blacks below. We no longer can base that on the legal institution of slavery, but we have a new legal institution, or at least a newly used legal institution, felony conviction. Right? Here's a system that had been rather slovenly about prosecuting whites for felonies in the antebellum period. Didn't have to worry about blacks because they were on the plantation under slavery. Now they are aggressively prosecuting felonies, and that's giving them a new legal basis for producing this very old relationship. But there's also another dimension to it, which is another feature of continuity between the old order and the new order in the South, and that is something that's different in the North, a kind of comfort level with the visible presence of otherwise stigmatized and subordinated others. I mean, you can see it even as late in the 60s in a movie represented in a movie like The Help, right? Where, unlike northern cities where blacks and whites, at least in the era I grew up in Chicago in the 1960s, would have been physically separated. So you just, in a white neighborhood, you just would have seen no black people, and in a black neighborhood, you would have seen no white people, and with some variation, obviously in commercial areas, streets, lots of Latinos and others making it a more complicated picture than I've just given, but physical separation. In The Help, which depicts Jackson, Mississippi in the 1960s, what you see is that black and white lives are inextricably intertwined in the most intimate ways, but because there's an ideology of total separation, total subordination, the physical proximity of the feared, stigmatized other is okay. It's kind of controlled and contained. And notice the lack of trust that these people would be under control that afflicted the Philadelphia system, in a sense, benefited in the South from the confidence that people had that private white actors were perfectly capable of controlling black criminals, even though they had this racially based fear of their criminality. Now, this system began to come under increasing attack at the end of the 19th century, both the northern congregate labor system and in the South, the convict lease system. Let me talk about the convict lease system first. The main arguments raised against the convict lease system eventually were ones of private unfairness. Essentially, this reflected the economic development of the South, the fact that you were getting more competition for economic opportunities and therefore growing resentment that some actors were benefited with this state form of subsidy by having access to cheap, free, essentially labor or very cheap labor. Presumably, people who paid off the sheriffs got the best shot at the healthiest, convicts so there was a kind of public corruption quality. Was one of the main arguments that was raised. And secondly, increasingly, and it's kind of ironic that as Jim Crow hardened in the South, as Reconstruction faded and the real threat of blacks having political power pretty much disappeared, and you begin to get the Jim Crow system that you can still see in a movie like The Help, ironically that goes along with increasing fear of African Americans. There's a growing distrust that the system can keep black convicts under control in this hodgepodge of factories and mines and manufacturers and farms. There's a desire for more visible control over them. And I think in many ways the chain gang that evolves in the early 1900s, or the 1890s, early 1900s, is a powerful way of solving both of these problems. First of all, you bring everybody into a public function. They're no longer working for private actors, so there's no private subsidy going on. But also, well, they're chained, right? It's no longer this loose system in which it's reliance on the private capitalists to maintain control of the prisoners. The chain is very important. It's a physical and visible dimension of this. Let me skip these slides to talk a little bit more about the chain gang. As I said, it's a public management system. A lot of it is focused on automobiles. Another reason that the chain gang becomes popular, especially in the early 1900s, is the rise of the automobile, which comes on like crazy, especially in the first 25 years of the 20th century. The automobile goes from being a minor toy for really rich people, sort of like a private airplane would be in our society, to a ubiquitous implement that lots of people have. And interestingly, it's rural America that is most immediately affected by the automobile. Automobiles are much more popular in the rural areas than in urban areas for the obvious reason that it can transform your life. If you have a vehicle in a rural setting, suddenly going to the market doesn't take all day. You can go and come back and do other things. But what do you need if you have automobiles? Roads. You need roads. And there's a strong sense that, well, here's a perfect solution to our problem with what to do with African-American criminals that we fear, but also don't want to subsidize private actors. Put them to work on the roads. And this slogan, bad boys make good roads, sort of captures the full racialization of this strategy. Here's a description from a federal road engineer observing one of these convict gangs in 1912. The convicts are largely made up of Negroes who are benefited by outdoor manual labor and are not injured by working in chains in public and do not possess the same aversion to working in public as is characteristic of the white race. So there's another difference with the wheelbarrow law, right? Black prisoners, there's no concern for their kind of dignitary harm in being subjected to this. So it's ironic in many ways that the chain gang was essentially a progressive institution. It was seen as less corrupt, more in keeping with good government, and also modern practices like the automobile. However, in the 1930s, it became something of a scandal. There were a number of popular movies, in particular the movie I Am a Fugitive from a Georgia Chain Gang, which was a novel. It got turned into a movie called I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. And it's a great movie, by the way, if you want to rent it over spring break as a kind of, since you'll miss this class, both Tuesday and Thursday, you should get this from Netflix. Very, very interesting. But it turns the chain gang into an image of regressiveness, racism, etc., where it lasts for a long time as exemplifying a kind of scandal. Interestingly, in the 90s, it made a comeback. I was living in Florida in 1995 when the chain gang was returned. These were really an interesting development. Some people may want to write on the sort of rebirth and then whatever happened to the reborn chain gang. As you might imagine, Southern law enforcement systems went out of their way to minimize the number of blacks on these chain gangs because they knew that they were going to be subject to the criticism that this is kind of return to Jim Crow. So, if you were a white inmate, your odds were actually slightly higher of ending up on one of these chain gangs, sort of affirmative action to get you out there. Women, as you see in this picture, actually were often selected again to undercut the idea that this was intended to be somehow brutally hard. Here's some of the governors that supported it. The real problem with the chain gang, the modern chain gang, costs way too much money. Mainly because of the labor costs involved in the guards, the insurance, and things of this nature. So startup costs for one chain gang in Florida turned out to be over $150,000 with recurring costs in excess of $100,000 per year. So that chain gang's going to have to fill a lot of potholes to actually be a profitable, productive kind of a thing to do. What about the North? In the North, the opposition to not convict lease, but the congregate factory-style prison came from unions and, as in the South, from other factory owners and capitalists who did not like the competition aspect. And by and large, states like New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois enacted laws in the early 1900s that didn't abolish labor in prison, but pretty much set limits to it. And those limits tended to say you can't use as prison labor that would be economically viable outside of prison. And that began to cut out the entire industrial model. And I think I'm going to hold for next time this sort of interregnum that we get in the 1930s where prisons are actually being constructed around the idea of labor, as Jackson Prison in Michigan was, but without any labor to put in that. And that creates a hole that in some ways rehabilitation fills. And we'll take that up next time. The readings from Eric Cummins are on DSpace. They're listed as part 1 and part 2, but they're part of the same reading assignment for Thursday. I will see you then.